300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malcolm with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Glad you could join me on this Monday morning. A lot to talk about, a great matchup in the NFL, weird weekend in the NFL, and even Jake Paul and Deron Williams in the fight game. I'm going to touch on those matches and those bouts as well. But I have to start in the NBA with my team, the LA Lakers, making their annual trip to the United Center to take on the Chicago Bulls. They always play the Chicago Bulls on the road right before Christmas. I'm not really sure how or why the calendar always shakes out like that, but typically that's when they travel to Chicago to face the Bulls. And they fell to Chicago 115 to 110. Now, here's the interesting thing, and here's the irony about the Lakers, is all off season, the perceived biggest advantage that we thought the Lakers were always going to have against their opponents was their size, was their height. When you have a guy in Anthony Davis who, unfortunately, he will be missing the next month due to a sprained knee ligament. But normally you have him, DeAndre Jordan, Dwight Howard, who, of course, wasn't playing due to health and safety protocols. He was away. But then you have LeBron, and you've got huge forwards like Carmelo Anthony and Trevor Ariza, who came back, made his first appearance of the season, made a season debut last night. You've got bigger guards in Westbrook. So the perceived advantage that the Lakers were going to have every single game that they played this year was the rebounding department. And though this team is 6th in the NBA in rebounding, 3rd in defensive rebounding, it's perplexing to me how often they get out-rebounded in games or during stretches or key moments and pivotal moments in games, especially down the stretch. It's mind-boggling to me that a team that's got so much height still finds a way to allow for offensive rebounds to opponents. And that was the problem last night, was rebounding down the stretch cost them. You have LeBron, who comes up with a huge defensive play, a huge defensive block on DeMar DeRozan, a signature patented kind of chase down block in a way by LeBron, just met him at the summit, turned him around, but they get an offensive rebound. And then DeMar DeRozan gets it back, and to his credit, he sticks the jumper. And on the ensuing possession, Lakers defense, they play great defense. They force a long miss. Offensive rebound tipped back out by Lonzo. And Lakers are forced to intentionally foul, and that's the game. But it's, again, mind-boggling to me that even with all this size, even with all this height, critical spots, critical junctures in games, they allow for offensive rebounds. And I'm not sure if it's a heart thing. I'm not sure if it's an effort or a desire, if it's just an unfortunate bounce, unfortunate touch on the rim. But that's something that they seriously have to clean up, because it's costing them games down the stretch. It's costing them opportunities to make their lives a lot easier And I will say this. Let me give credit to DeMar DeRozan. I've been saying for the last several weeks that DeMar DeRozan has been absolutely sensational this year. The type of season that he's having was worthy and is worthy of consideration for MVP status. That's how good this guy has been. He dropped 38 points last night for the second consecutive time against the Lakers. He has set his season high 38 points both times against the Lakers, and even he admitted it's probably not a coincidence that that's happened. Had 6 rebounds, 4 assists, 16 of 17 from the free throw line. But here's probably the most important stat there is. 0 3-point shot attempts. DeMar DeRozan has fully embraced who he is. He hasn't tried to change his game to fit today's NBA style. He's not jacking up and hoisting up tons of three-pointers like people are hoping he will. He was 11 for 24 from the field, shot all jumpers, and he scored 19 points in the fourth quarter. Get this. The best fourth quarter scorer in the NBA this season has been DeMar DeRozan, averaging 8 points per game, over 54% shooting from the floor, 45.5% from the three-point line, 91% from the free throw line in fourth quarters this year. He's been lights out in the fourth quarter. And on the season, he's been doing everything. 26 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 50% shooting from the floor. So DeMar DeRozan has kind of revolutionized and transformed the Chicago Bulls, and especially with the absence of Zach LaVine, he's been really carrying them and has been doing a marvelous job, and I have to give them credit, and I have to give him credit specifically for that turnaround. Lonzo Ball, of course, love to see that he's thriving in Chicago. 19 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists. He's really found a comfort zone in the Windy City. Of course, only fitting that Alex Caruso would stick it to the Lakers. It seems like every former Laker sticks it, or every player that's been spurned by the Lakers at some point in their career, always against the Lakers, has one of their best offensive performances of the season. It just seems to happen that way. And Alex Caruso, 17 points, 9 rebounds, 2 assists. So those types of performances, I guess you would expect to see. But the thing is, for the Lakers, the shame is that this was a great effort by them. I really thought that they competed extremely hard, especially in that third quarter. They had a great third quarter and a great second half. LeBron had 12 points in the third quarter, and they just seemed to be conjuring up a much more profound defensive effort than what we've seen from them in games past. Again, I've talked about they can only pick and choose when they want to play elite defense. The makeup of this roster won't allow them to sit in the chair for extensive minutes every single game. So you're going to get about once every 2 weeks a really good defensive effort. And I really thought that they played extremely well, and LeBron found his stroke for the most part. Obviously not as much from the three-point line. But the problem is, what are we going to do now with Anthony Davis gone for a month? And this was the first opportunity last night to see, well, how is this chemistry going to work with LeBron and Westbrook? Can the two of them carry the day? That's why they traded for Westbrook. In circumstances like this, if one of the two superstars go down, do you have another superstar to ride shotgun with him? Because that's the idea of the construction of the team, is to always have 2 superstars on the floor at once. And so it looked like for a little bit Westbrook and LeBron were playing pretty well together. And Westbrook, to his credit, all season, and especially as of late over the last couple months, has been a lot more efficient and a lot more judicious with his shot selection. But still, the turnovers are just a huge impediment to this team. It's just shooting yourselves in the foot. He had 6 turnovers, and I love Westbrook. You can see his jersey's right behind me. Absolutely love Russell Westbrook. But I don't like that he committed a bad turnover late in the game. I didn't love that he was the one shooting the shot down the stretch on the second to last possession for the Lakers. I want the ball in LeBron's hands. And that's not a slight or an indictment on Westbrook. It's just It's more paying a compliment to LeBron that I want the ball in his hands, making the decision down the stretch. And he was kind of taken out of the play. And you see the type of trust that he has in Melo. Carmelo Anthony was sensational. He had one of these throwback performances that he's been actually more prone to do and has been doing with more regularity with the Lakers. He had 21 points last night, and there was a specific sequence where that was really telling in the fourth quarter where LeBron passed up 2 open shots to set up Melo for threes. And Carmelo Anthony knocked both of those down. And you could just see him brimming with confidence. And that's what you see night in and night out, especially between those two guys. And so there were a lot of great takeaways. Again, Melo played well. It was an encouraging sight just to see Trevor Ariza out on the floor. Still no Kendrick Nunn. Obviously, THT, Dwight, Monk, all those guys are in health and safety protocols. So Lakers were severely hamstrung. No Frank Vogel either as far as their personnel. But those are the types of games that are just killers, because that's a perfect example of a game that the Lakers should have won yesterday, that were in the perfect position to win if you just get the rebound. One rebound ices the game, ostensibly. So I'm a little bit concerned now with Anthony Davis gone for a month, which I knock on wood that's all the time that he has to miss. I'm glad that it wasn't a more severe injury than that. Certainly did not look good against the Minnesota Timberwolves. So wishing him a speedy recovery, but I'm just not sure what type of defensive performance the Lakers can conjure up every single night, especially without Davis now. And I thought last night was a good one to have and to get, and they let it slip through their hands. Let it slip through their hands. I want to transition to the NFL for a moment. A lot of great games, no question about it. But there's one game in particular that I wanted to touch on, and that's the Indianapolis Colts and the New England Patriots. So this was essentially the season for the Indianapolis Colts, because their playoff hopes pretty much hinged, because if they lost to the Pats and they were 7-7 in the highly contested AFC, it almost seems like it would be too insurmountable of a comeback to make the postseason, because of just how narrow the margins are in the AFC. If you lose to another AFC foe, the odds of you getting that, they would have been in the 11th seed as opposed to the 5th seed, which is where they're at right now. The path forward just seemed very bleak, in my opinion, and a bit grim. And so they really needed this win yesterday, and they played like it with their season on the line. And so from that perspective, I wasn't completely surprised by the outcome, because they're taking on a New England Patriots team viewed as the best team in the conference. They were the hottest team in the NFL, riding a 7-game win streak. And they just seemed like they kind of had this perfect sheen to their exterior for the last 2 months. No one could puncture any holes. The Bills got close with some help from the weather, but Pats got the job done last week, and they looked like they were probably going to compete really well this week. And to the credit of the Indianapolis Colts, they ran all over them. And that's the one thing when you watch the New England Patriots, is they can be had against teams who can run the football. There are 2 bad matchups for them. There are 2. And this one was one of them. The Indianapolis Colts and the Tennessee Titans are the 2 worst matchups for the New England Patriots. 2 teams that feature dominant and established running backs in the NFL. Because the New England Patriots are bottom 10 in their defense against the run. They can be had against teams who can run the football. Jonathan Taylor, who continues to make his MVP case, and by the way, I would just like to say as an aside, given how much Tom Brady struggled last night, I think that Aaron Rodgers is obviously the front runner for MVP, but I think Jonathan Taylor, there's a good argument to be made that he should be second in the MVP race right now, especially after 29 carries, 170 yards, a touchdown on Saturday. He was running all over, running roughshod over the New England Patriots. And we even saw against the Tennessee Titans, a game that the Pats dominated like 36-13. The Titans still ran for 270 yards. Hilliard had like 150 yards that game. So they can be had against teams who can run the football. And that's the biggest issue with them. No team is perfect. That's their biggest flaw right now. And so the question that we always had about the Patriots that we still, quite frankly, don't have the answer to is how can this team function and operate when they're trailing big? Because the Colts led 20-0 after 3 quarters. And we've pegged the Patriots as a team that is not a come-from-behind team. And there was nothing from their performance on Saturday that would indicate anything differently, that would cause us to change that narrative. There isn't. They really struggled, and it's not a surprise. They go from, you have 1 week where Mac Jones throws 3 passes in inclement weather in Buffalo against the Bills last week. He goes from a 3-pass performance to throwing it 45 times on the road at Indianapolis. And to be honest, even though, he threw for 299 yards, 2 touchdowns, but he threw 2 picks, and most of those passing yards came in the fourth quarter when the game was pretty much out of hand. So how do I interpret that? I interpret it one simple way. The team simply functions a lot better when they're able to establish the run and when they're not trailing big. Which, sure, you could say, well, Jonah, come on. That's the recipe for a lot of teams. Sure. But when you watch a team like the Buccaneers or the Packers or the Chiefs with firepower, even if they're trailing big, sure, the outcome may look bleak, but you're saying to yourself, well, who do they have on the other side? Oh, they have Aaron Rodgers. Oh, they have Tom Brady. Oh, they got Patrick Mahomes. So they can probably eat up big chunks and get back into the game. You don't have that same feeling with Mac Jones at this point in his career. So that's going to be a formula come postseason if you're playing against the Patriots, is if you can jump on them early, then you have a better chance to win. And the other thing is the Colts defense did a great job neutralizing the Patriots run game, which is something that we've seen over the course of the season is their main recipe for success. They only had 81 rushing yards on Saturday night. And this is a team that wants to run the clock down. They want to eat up time of possession and rely on their defense and a couple key throws from Mac Jones to win them games. But it's the backs that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And they didn't get that on Saturday night. And that's why you have to credit the Indianapolis Colts. Darius Leonard, 10 total tackles, 8 solo tackles. DeForest Buckner had a sack. And the Indianapolis Colts have been one of the hottest teams in football. I'd say along with the 49ers and the New England Patriots entering this week, the Colts are one of the hottest teams. They'd won 6 of their last 8 games. They've won 4 of their last 5. And it's been because of the defense and the run game with Jonathan Taylor. Those 2 factors have been the difference. And if you exclude the only loss that they've suffered over the last 5 games against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, in which they gave up a game-winning drive to Tom Brady, with the exception of that one game, their defense has held opponents to 12 points per game. So they're starting to round into form. And if you've been watching this show, if you've listened to me before, I'm going to rehash this one more time. I've said this about a gazillion times, that I'm extremely bullish about the Indianapolis Colts. Why? I don't know. I love Jonathan Taylor. He's a Wisconsin running back, and I'm always going to – Wisconsin guys are always going to curry a little bit more favor in my book, but I just truly love the complexion of this team. You look at this team and you say, the Indianapolis Colts are going to go however far Jonathan Taylor's legs can run them for. As long as Carson Wentz can be competent, doesn't have to be great. If he can be competent and make a couple key throws in every single game, the Indianapolis Colts can advance pretty far in the postseason. They're the 5th seed right now, the number 1 wild card. They have an outside shot of winning their own division, given the fact that the Titans have been slipping. Who wants to face the Indianapolis Colts in the postseason? There's not a single team who is salivating at the chance to face Frank Wright, Jonathan Taylor, and the Colts. No one's doing that. And you look at the rest of their schedule, and it's actually pretty favorable. They go to the Arizona Cardinals, who are inexplicably reeling right now. They just lost to the Detroit Lions, and it's not like they lost to the Detroit Lions off a game winner like the Vikings. They beat them soundly, like 30-12. It was embarrassing. And so they're reeling right now. DeAndre Hopkins is lost for the regular season and the majority of the postseason. If they were to make the NFC Championship game, that then maybe he'd be back. And as an aside, it just further highlights the fact that any team can be beaten in the NFL on any given Sunday. I mean, just look, Cardinals to the Lions, and they lose badly. That's the reality of the game. That's the reality of the sport. Anyone can be had on any given Sunday. And so they travel to Arizona, so they're probably catching the Cardinals at the most ideal time if they were to face them on the road. Then they return home against the Las Vegas Raiders, who are in shambles right now. We'll see how they fare against the Browns, but they're in shambles right now. And then they end the season on the road at Jacksonville, who's a dumpster fire. And they've got no incentive to continue to win because right now they're in line to collect their 2nd straight number 1 overall pick if they continue to lose. So, yes, the players are going to be fighting for a victory, but at the end of the day, it doesn't behoove them to actually win. So right now, the schedule is laying out kind of beautifully for the Indianapolis Colts to continue to rack up some wins. And again, just continue to get healthy, develop some momentum heading into the postseason. And I really like the way that team is trending. And I just think that they're a really well-coached group. And as I said, Jonathan Taylor is an absolute monster. And I do think that right now he's probably 2nd in the MVP race behind Aaron Rodgers. I truly believe that. Do I think he will win it? No, especially if the Packers continue to win. But I think he should definitely be garnering that type of consideration if he hasn't already. I mean, it's just the AFC too. It's like the wild west. There's just so much cannibalism going on within that own conference that who knows how it's going to shake out. We really don't know. The AFC North is wild, so we'll see what the rest of this week with games today and Tuesday, how that all unfolds. But tremendous win for the Indianapolis Colts. Okay, so I want to transition to the boxing world. We've had some fun bouts recently. And over the weekend, we had Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley round 2. And this time, this was convincing. Say what you want about Jake Paul and the split decision against Tyron Woodley the first go-round, and it wasn't convincing. And was he really the better fighter? Yet he was unequivocally better this second go-round. This one was convincing. I mean, he knocked him out in the 6th round, and it was lights out. Face plant to the canvas. Good night. Read a bedtime story. Check in with you tomorrow. Upper right hand, shot to the face. Woodley was expecting a jab towards the body, and Paul caught him. Just clocked him clean. You look at all different vantage points. They got so many different videos going around of the actual punch that he landed. Vicious right hand to the upper part of the head. And here's the interesting thing, because similar to their first go round, the first 5 rounds of this fight were actually fairly even. And the fight was kind of scored fairly evenly. Most of the judges had the score slightly favoring Jake Paul, like 49, 47, 48, 46, 48, 45, something like that. So the margin was pretty similar. And honestly, even though Tyron Woodley landed more power punches, the total punches landed was about even. The power punches landed slightly favored Tyron Woodley. But when you really looked at the two fighters who looked physically a little bit better, it was Jake Paul. He seemed to be in more control of the fight. But this is the impressive thing. Here's what was most impressive about that fight to me. Whenever you look at rookies in any sport, it takes time to develop. It takes time to improve. When Kobe entered the league in the NBA, he wasn't the same guy that he was in the middle of his career. Same thing with LeBron, same thing with Steph, same thing with KD, same thing with any sport, any player who enters the league. When Jake Paul started fighting, when you looked at the skill sets within his first bout, he wasn't a skilled fighter. He's still not the most polished fighter, but when he first stepped into the ring, he wasn't a skilled fighter at all. And even in the bouts against Nate Robinson and Ben Askren, he really only had an uppercut. He had one kind of vicious right hand to the face, kind of like Deontay Wilder. But then, similar to Deontay Wilder, what did we see? Well, we saw the evolution. We saw the work being put in, because then when he fought Tyron Woodley the first time, the tactics were a little bit different. He was clinching a lot more, which is a smart tactic. He was using the body jab. He wasn't just simply trying to get one big strike, one big lick on his opponent, like Deontay Wilder. Yes, everyone knows him for his vicious right hand, but it was the other aspects of boxing that he was starting to develop a little bit more that helped him out. And with Jake Paul, we saw this the second go-round against Tyron Woodley was, okay, he's utilizing the clinch, which is important. It's a really smart tactic. Slows down momentum for the other guy, gives yourself a breather, allows you to position yourself a little bit better. Now his footwork's better, his conditioning better, his boxing stamina is better. He's utilizing the body jab. Now he's being able to execute more advanced sequences. So it wasn't just about the vicious right hand, which was the case with him early on. And it's pretty remarkable when you look at what he's accomplished over the course of the last 3 years. This is a guy who turned pro at 21. He's 24 right now. He began his professional fighting debut in August of 2018, fought some nobody YouTuber that was an amateur kind of exhibition, didn't even count on his record. Then he fought a YouTuber for his first official fight. Then, obviously, Nate Robinson, he clocked. Ben Askren, he clocked. Former mixed martial artist. So no one was impressed with those performances. Then even against Tyron Woodley, the first time was a little bit questionable. But then he knocks him out. And mind you, this is a former world #1 UFC champion. Now, granted, it took place during like 2016 to 2019, a little bit different. He was a little bit younger, but this was a professional fighter in Tyron Woodley, who he just absolutely clocked. And again, he's a former UFC champion. And he's 5-0, 4 via knockouts. And obviously, to Tyron Woodley's credit, and Jake Paul gave him a big shout-out for accepting this fight within 2 weeks' notice, because he was supposed to fight Tommy Fury, a.k.a. Love Island superstar and the half-brother of Tyson Fury. But he had to back out due to broken ribs and a chest infection. And Tyron Woodley just stepped up to the challenge and accepted the fight on short terms. And Jake Paul clocked him. But this is the thing that I've always said about Jake Paul. You can question his character. You can question his abilities and the veracity of his fighting techniques. You can question all that. But to his credit, he's become a maverick, because he has found ways to circumvent traditional methods of promoting fights. Instead of relying on third-party intermediaries like Dana White and the UFC to promote these bouts, he's blazed a new trail. He said no through his most valuable promotions production company. He's promoting his own fights. And the reality is, with a guy like that who's got over 18 million followers on Instagram, 15 million followers on TikTok, 4 million on Twitter, he can reach eyeballs. There is going to be interest there. And to his credit, he's found a way to exploit that and monetize that better than anyone else who's come along in the fight game. And he called out Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz after. And to be perfectly frank, whether or not those two guys want to accept that fight right now or even entertain that fight right now, the one thing you can't deny is he's got much more extensive reach than they do. And as big as Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz are, because they are big when it comes to UFC, and as much clout as they have within the UFC fight game and the UFC community, that fan base, their reach is much more limited compared to Jake Paul. Jake Paul would make them more money than they probably have ever had in a fight of their career so far. That's the truth. That's the truth. And to his credit, he's been doing that. And so it was really entertaining. And I got to give him credit. He is looking more and more formidable each time he steps out there. Now, I'm not advocating for him to fight Canelo Alvarez right now because he would get absolutely torched by Canelo. He's not ready for that type of fight just yet. But he's looking more and more legit every time he steps into the boxing ring. And just like anything, it takes time. It takes time to develop. It takes time to round into form. But he's starting to do that. Final topic before my Malkin's moments was the other fight. There wasn't just one fight. It wasn't just Jake Paul, Tyron Woodley. There was also an undercard featuring Deron Williams and Frank Gore, the former NBA All-Star Deron Williams, the former NFL, recently retired NFL star Frank Gore, who, again, was receiving calls and receiving interest in playing in the NFL this year. He turned them down to pursue some of these boxing opportunities. And the bout was actually initially was supposed to be a legitimate fight, and it was reversed and turned into an exhibition by the Florida State Boxing Commission. And Deron Williams won via split decision. Said the scorecard was about 38-37, 37-38, 40-35. Let me first say this. Shout out to both those guys. Shout out to both those guys for their willingness to participate, for their willingness to put on this fight. This isn't just like a backyard fight where you've got a couple hundred fans, rough and rowdy. Their first professional fighting debut was on pay-per-view in a sold-out arena with millions of people watching. It's their credit. They owned it. And they were willing to take on one another under these kind of extenuating circumstances, in my opinion. And it was actually vastly entertaining, a lot more entertaining than I thought it was going to be. And they are two big dudes. It's so interesting because you see Deron Williams on a basketball court and you see him next to all these other NBA guys and you're saying, he looks stocky and buff, but he doesn't look that big compared to LeBron or a center. And you look at Frank Gore and you see him in all these pads, you don't fully understand the mass and the volume that he takes up. And then you see these guys with their shirts off and 12-ounce gloves on, and they're delivering blow after blow, and they're absorbing them. And that's when you realize, whoa, these guys are actually huge. And again, to their credit, they were actually landing some vicious punches. They were staying in there. Unfortunately, Frank Gore just became the world's new favorite meme going around where you almost look like you've seen ghosts, where you can see the whites of people's eyes, where they roll back into your head because of a couple vicious punches that were landed by Deron Williams. But this is the interesting thing for me. And this was a question that I was contemplating prior to watching this all together, which was, well, what was the impetus behind this fight? Because to me, the question always becomes, fights are inherently entertaining. People, they just want to see two people fight. Why? I don't know. There's something interesting. There's something enticing inherently in that. So outside of that, what is going to be the hook? What is going to glue people to the television that's going to bring them away from whatever else they're doing to watch this specific event? Typically, it's narrative. It's storyline. There's some intriguing aspect of the fight, of the matchup, that gravitates people towards a television set. Maybe they've got previous history. There's some connection between the two of them. My biggest problem with this fight, heading into it at least, was why these two guys? Obviously, Deron Williams wrestled in high school, and he's a part owner of a gym now, and Frank Gore has been doing some boxing training for several years. But outside of that, where's the animus between these two specific gentlemen? And clearly it wasn't there, and it still wasn't there. You could see at the very end of the fight how congratulatory they were of one another, which I'm not advocating that they needed to be hostile towards one another, or that there needed to be any kind of contentious relationship between the two. I'm not saying that, but typically that's what makes it more intriguing. You see Conor McGregor and his fights against Dustin Poirier, there is true bad blood, true bad intentions between those two guys. So it's interesting to see them fight. But to their credit, Deron Williams and Frank Gore, they stepped out into the ring, and it was captivating. We bought it. They sold it. It looked like two guys who had disdain for one another out in the ring. And it was something that at least was worth my time. But I will say, when it comes to the actual fight itself and the technique, I mean, Deron Williams, to me, the biggest difference was the 6'3" to 5'9" juxtaposition was the main difference. I mean, you look at Deron Williams, he's 6'3". The weight was classified at 215 pounds, but his reach with the extensive wingspan was the main difference, because he could attack Frank Gore from a farther distance to protect himself a little bit. He was a lot more powerful with his punches. And I think that the sheer size and the sheer magnitude of Deron Williams was just a little bit too much for Frank Gore, because Gore had to get really close to Williams to strike him. And that can be a really dangerous and perilous strategy in the fight game, because you just look at the size and the length of Deron Williams, and he just wasn't nearly as exposed quite often. And typically, he had Frank Gore on the ropes. And again, those are two big guys, and Deron Williams pushed Frank Gore through the ropes at one point and had him cornered a couple times. In fact, he landed more punches. They officially scored it 48-39 as far as landed punches. Power punches, 35-28 advantage. And again, you just kind of forget how big Deron Williams is at 6'3", Frank Gore just 5'9". Entertaining, though. It was definitely an entertaining fight. And again, shout out to both those guys for their willingness to simply compete in that, because that was a pretty big stage to make your fighting debut. I will say that. Okay, final topic, my Malkins moments. This is one Malkins moment, just one Malkins moment this week that I wanted to touch on. Shout out to the Wisconsin women's volleyball program for winning its first ever women's volleyball national championship. Major, major accomplishment for a Wisconsin Badgers team who had been cracking on the door, been knocking on the door, but cracking just the mold of previous kind of teams. They've been so close time after time after time. And this was an epic 5-set match. If you got a chance to watch this against Nebraska, they outlasted the Cornhuskers in 5 sets. And it was captivating and thrilling for the entire 3 hours. It truly was. And Nebraska took the first set. Badgers took the second and the third sets. And mind you, the second set went 31-29 to Wisconsin. It was one of the most epic second sets that I've seen. Cornhuskers took the fourth, and the Badgers pulled out the fifth, 15-12. But it was just an absolute spectacle. And it was only fitting that the reigning player of the year winner, or not the reigning, but the recently named player of the year winner in Dana Redke would record the game-winning kill. It was only fitting and that it would end like that with her. She's the first Badger to ever be the national player of the year. She had 11 kills, a career high 13 tying blocks, which, again, this is a 6'8" middle blocker who decided to return for her fifth season of eligibility, along with a couple other players. And the reason why this is extra special is because this is a Wisconsin team that had just lost to Stanford in the national championship match in 2019. This was their fifth trip to the Final Four, their fourth trip to the national championship match. They lost to Nebraska in 2000, lost to Penn State in 2013, and they lost to Stanford in 2019. And last year, because of COVID, the NCAA tournament was played in the spring as opposed to the end of fall, early winter. And the Badgers were the number one seed. They were undefeated. They reached the Final Four, and they were swept by Texas. And there was just a bitter taste in their mouths, and four seniors came back to be kind of their fifth year of eligibility because of COVID, allowed them to retain, almost like it granted them an additional season. And they came back, and they got the job done. And for this to come also against a Big Ten conference foe and a rival in Nebraska, a team who they had beaten twice in the regular season and who historically has been one of the best volleyball programs in the country. Nebraska's won 5 national championships in volleyball, and they were seeking number 6. They had reached the national championship match in 2018. They beat Wisconsin, as I mentioned, in 2000, and they were on this incredible run as a 10th seed in this tournament, just demolishing opponents along the way. And this was the 11th time since the NCAA tournament was established in 1981. This was the 11th time that it went 5 sets. And this was the 10th national championship game match appearance for Nebraska. And for me, I'm a little bit emotionally torn. I was a little bit emotionally conflicted because half of my family, including my mom, are from Nebraska. They were born in Omaha. My mom was born in Omaha. I have several aunts and uncles who were born in Omaha. My grandparents were born in Omaha. And yet I went to Wisconsin, and that's where my allegiance lies. But I have a soft spot for Nebraska as well. So when this matchup came, it was just, on the one hand, I was extremely excited that I could be happy for either side to win. But at the same time, I knew that I'd be a little bit disappointed in whomever lost. So, not to mention, I mentioned this was a spectacle. What I love the most is how much interest there was in this championship match. This was a record-selling crowd that was at Nationwide Arena in Columbus, Ohio. They had 18,755 people. It was an NCAA championship record for the most people to show up. It's deserving. I'm glad that the sport is garnering that type of attention, that type of consideration. And for this Badgers program, again, they'd been so close in years past, and they were after they were formed in 1974, and Steve Lowe took over the program in 86. They won the NIT championship in 89. Then this team really started to blossom. And when I graduated from Wisconsin in 2019, that was when they were really starting to turn the corner. They were starting to get really good. In fact, Dana Redke was actually a freshman, and then she was a sophomore over the last 2 years that I was at Wisconsin. And when I was calling their volleyball matches during those seasons, they were starting to look really good. That was kind of when they were beginning to crack into the top 25 consistently. And now to see where they're at right now, what they were able to accomplish this year, just a major congratulations to that entire program, to that university, and to my alma mater. And I was extremely thrilled to see them win. That's all the time that I've got for you today. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Morning Joe every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific, Mondays and Wednesday mornings. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe with Jonah Malkin. Follow me on Twitter at Jonah Malkin or at morning_Joe_, Instagram, JMalk97, TikTok, Jonah Malkin. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.